Thank you and welcome. I always look forward to AGM Day to come and tell our story. It's a good story. We make it a little bit better every year, and I'm happy and proud to be the one who gets to tell it for the employees and on behalf of the board. Let's start with the status report. Here today at the end of the first quarter of 2024. We have 12 consecutive quarters of year-on-year growth. That's 3 full years now, where the current quarter has been better than the same quarter in the year before. And we had a very strong April. We were 4.4 million engine equivalents, so we're confident that we'll carry that string to a 13th consecutive quarter. Series production is up 23% in the first 4 months of the year. The average at this point is 4.0 million. Actually, I thought we could have been a little bit better than that. There's growth to be had. I'm sure that we'll continue to improve during the rest of the year. We've had a very strong start for installations. We had 1.2 million at the end of the first quarter, but we've got a lot of discussions that are ongoing and at a very advanced point. And now our challenge is to move those from discussions to decisions. We're approaching the halfway point of the year, and we would like to get some of those decisions frozen before the half and focus on installation and commissioning during the second half of the year. Our CO2 contribution at the end of the first quarter is 61 million tons. I think that's something that we can all be proud of. We have a target to reach 100 million tons before 2028. The trajectory shows that we're on pace to do that, I think perhaps even a little bit early. With your decision later today, we will have reached 14 consecutive quarters of increasing ordinary dividend. I look forward to telling more about that during the rest of the presentation and why we have the confidence that we'll continue to extend that and reach our target of 25 consecutive years. The last year was also the first year for us to implement a share buyback. In the end, we purchased 22,601 shares at an average price of about 105 crowns per share. I think it was a really good exercise. It was value creating, but it was also a statement. It was a statement that we felt that the share was undervalued and we weren't satisfied with it. And one thing is to talk about it and another thing is to take an action. And so I'm very pleased with the action that we took to support the share. That's a voting item again on the agenda this year, and I do hope that the shareholders will continue to support that. There's room for one more bullet at the bottom of the page, and that is that compared to this day last year, the share price is now up 29%. I just edited that in the last hour, so there's been a really positive response in the share as well. Let's carry on. We'll look at different metrics for how we measure our performance. And everyone is familiar with this plot. I've been showing it for perhaps 10 years now. We have a very consistent growth trend. And I've always said that we can approximate it as a straight line. And the fun thing in this presentation, when I go to make the overheads in advance of this meeting, at 3 years now, I've used the same line. I just cut and paste it into this overhead. I have to nudge it up a little bit because we grow, but I haven't changed the slope. And that shows the consistency of our growth. Over the last 10 years, we've had a compounded annual growth rate of 9.3%, and over a 15-year period, 12.1%. And our goal, as we published last year, is to continue double-digit compounded annual growth through 2030. And I'll come back to that later in the presentation and show why we have the confidence that we're able to deliver that. Let's also look at revenue growth. 95% of our revenue comes directly from the series production. About 2/3 of that is from the software license and the production fee. 1/3 of it is from the sampling consumables. So it's logical that the growth in our revenue mirrors our growth in the series production. And indeed, if you do the math on this data set, we have 10.0% compounded annual growth rate in the revenue over the last 10 years. I like to present it as a specific revenue, the revenue per employee. We have revenue of 4.6 million crowns per employee, and most importantly, profit of 1.5 million crowns per employee. 2 years ago at this meeting, that was 1.0 million. We've grown the revenue, we have changed the organization to become more efficient, we've reduced the headcount, and we've had a significant increase in our profit. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to drive the operating margin, both on the revenue side and on the cost side. Last year we had 31.8% operating margin for the full year. We have a target of 40% by 2028, and I'm confident that we will meet that. We will do it primarily through changes in the organization. We all know that I will leave in 2 years. My successor is already in the company. We also have our senior-most engineer, who is based in America, who will retire at the end of 2025. His replacement is already in the company. So from both a cost point of view and a headcount point of view, I see that we will be lower in the near term, and the revenue will grow, and that will push the operating margin toward 40 and beyond. The dividend, we have a very aggressive dividend policy. You see that it's 14 consecutive years, and during that time we've returned 111% of the operating result to our shareholders. The cumulative dividend over that time has now reached 325 million Swedish crowns. If you've been with us since 2011, you will have received 46 crowns for each share that you own. I had always hoped that my shares would be free before I retired. I won't quite make it, but I won't have to wait long after that. And as I said, I'll come back later in the presentation to why we have confidence in reaching 25 consecutive years of growing the ordinary dividend. Climate contribution, it's a wonderful trend. At the end of the first quarter, we reached 61 million tons. Our material, CGI, makes engines smaller and lighter and more efficient. What we do is we make transportation cleaner. It's something that we can all be proud of. We will reach our 100 million ton per year total target, and I believe that we may reach it a little bit early. So with that as background on our key metrics, let's look at the current production. This is quite stable over the last years. We are 53% commercial vehicle, 29% Super Duty pickup, 10% full-size pickup, 4% mid-size pickup, SUV, and 4% off-road. For many years now, I have said that commercial vehicles are our biggest growth opportunity. I have also said that in the fullness of time, all commercial vehicles will become CGI, and that's proving to be true. Last year at this meeting, the number for commercial vehicles was 47%. If you go to the annual report, the number for full year 2023 was 51%, and now today at the end of the first quarter, 53%. So you see this growth in the commercial vehicles. As commercial vehicles are so important to us, I want to focus on that today. And the best place to start is at the beginning. And this is actual statistics from full year 2023 of heavy-duty commercial vehicle sales in the US and in Europe. And you can see that in both, it's more than 96% diesel, and diesel dominates. So how will that change? In our industry, sometimes things change because of competition, sometimes because of consumer demand, but more often than not, for us in the auto industry, it's because of legislation. There has been a lot of publicity about legislation. I think that sometimes that is misunderstood. I think that sometimes it is exaggerated. And it's important to go beyond the headlines. And I want to take extra time today to look at the legislation in detail and show how that gives us confidence. It's also a really good time to look at legislation because in March, the United States published new emissions legislation for cars and for trucks. In April, the European Union published new legislation rules for cars and for trucks. So let's take some time to look at that today. This isn't a SinterCast overhead. This is a screenshot from the EPA ruling for heavy-duty vehicles. It was published on 29 March, and I want to key on the type of trucks that we do, because up in the beginning, you have things like utility trucks and dump trucks and local city trucks. Where we work is down at the bottom with the big ones. There are so-called day cab tractors that travel around cities, and there are sleeper cabs where they travel long haul for several days. And you can see that the requirement for CO2 emissions relative to 2026 will decrease for day cabs by 16%, and for sleeper cabs by 6%. And we have a little bit more sleeper than we do day cab, so let's say that the average between the two of them is 10%. Yeah? So today, if the market is 100, in 2030 it will be 90. Yeah? But what I've also said is that today the CGI penetration is about 40%, and in 2030 it will be more than 80. So we go from 100 down to 90, we lose 10, but we gain 40. It's net growth. It's strong net growth. If you ask what's going to change in the North American trucking industry between now and 2030, almost nothing. Almost nothing. The only thing that's going to change is that CGI will grow. Yeah? And that is the root basis of our confidence in being able to continue that same slope growth through 2030. We can also look at Europe. Europe published on April 11. It's not a law, it's a draft law. And it has to be voted by the European Parliament after the European elections in early June. So that vote will come sometime during the summer. And what the European Union has said is that relative to 2019, the fleet emissions for trucks in 2019, in 2030, there will have to be a 45% reduction. In 2035, a 65% reduction, and in 2040, a 90% reduction. So again, what changes until 2030? It's not a big change. And again, this is a screenshot from the European Union. It's not a SinterCast slide. So we require some number of zero-emission vehicles in 2030, and what has the legislation approved as a zero-emission vehicle? Battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and hydrogen internal combustion engine. It's still an open discussion as to whether net zero liquid fuels will be accepted. So net zero liquid fuels are when we take CO2 from the atmosphere or take CO2 from an industry and convert it into a liquid fuel, or when we take things like used cooking oil and animal fat and wood chips and process them to make a diesel fuel. And there is net zero when we burn them in an engine. About a year ago, the European Union published that car engines should be banned in 2035. Yeah? And you'll remember that Germany and Italy and a couple of other countries opposed that, and the European Union made a reversal. And they said, yes, the problem isn't the engine, the problem is the energy. And if you burn renewable fuels, net zero fuels, that's okay. So they made an exemption. That was in every newspaper. But what we haven't heard as much about is that likewise for the commercial vehicles, Germany opposed, and they have made a reversal. Yeah? And maybe it's because everyone buys a car and so it's in every newspaper, and not everyone buys a commercial vehicle, so we don't hear so much about it. But I found an article from Euractiv website, and they are pro-electric, and so they celebrated it as blockade lifted. Germany gives way on EU's 2040 truck CO2 rules. And this is the transport minister of Germany in the picture. And below it says, a last-minute deal in Berlin has paved the way for approval of the EU's 2040 target of reducing heavy-duty vehicle emissions by 90% in exchange for a clause dedicated to vehicles running on e-fuels. So again, let's go beyond the headlines. Let's look at the legislation. This is the clause in the EU legislation from 11 April, and it's clause 17, and it says, following consultation with shareholders, Germany, the trucking industry, the Commission will, within 1 year of the date of entry into force of this regulation, it means 2027, assess the role of a methodology for registering heavy-duty vehicles running exclusively on CO2 neutral fuels in conformity with union law and with the union's climate neutrality objective. Yeah? What it means is they couldn't decide yet. In 2027, they'll come back to it. So far, the EU law is based entirely on tailpipe emissions. This, if you read more detail in the legislation, will be based on life cycle. Yeah? The Americans have already done the life cycle. Everyone has done life cycle. Life cycle is difficult. So this is a study from the American Transportation Research Institute, and they show in the first bar the life cycle CO2 for a normal diesel truck based on virgin fossil fuel. In the middle bar for a battery truck, you see the blue part at the bottom is the construction of the batteries in the vehicles. The orange part is the operation being fed with electricity from the American grid, and the little bit at the top is for recycling and disposal. So if you change from today's engine to a battery electric vehicle, you save 30% of the life cycle CO2. If you change to an engine running on renewable diesel, you save 67%. So this study was criticized. They said that the reason for the result was that a heavy-duty truck can drive a long distance, and therefore they chose a vehicle with a lot of batteries, and the vehicle was very heavy and using a lot of battery-critical materials. So they expanded the study to include a vehicle that travels 405 kilometers and also 240 kilometers. And you see that it becomes asymptotic. The result isn't really difficult. And the middle bar is important. It is 250 miles in US money. The reason that they chose that is because 77% of heavy-duty truck journeys in the United States are more than 250 miles. Yeah? But it doesn't matter, as I say, even when you go to small batteries, the renewable diesel still provides a better life cycle solution. The American Trucking Research Council also did an economic analysis of it, and they said that because we have the existing infrastructure to distribute renewable fuels, and because we have refueling stations, we don't need to build out the electrical infrastructure for recharging, and people don't have to buy new vehicles, which are still considerably more expensive than conventional vehicles. So for electric, for this same amount of CO2 reduction, they would have to spend 1.1 trillion US dollars, and for the renewable diesel, just over 200 billion. So it was about 6 times less expensive for society to opt for the renewable diesel route. So it will be fascinating to see in 2027 what the EU decides. In America, it's accepted, and that's our biggest market. In the EU, we're going to have to wait a little while. While we're looking at legislation, let's also look at light duty, because in North America, we have the pickup truck applications. And again, this is a screenshot from the EPA ruling made on 20 March. And you can see that the title is that they project a mix of technologies. And of course, that will be the solution. It won't all be all electric. It won't all be hydrogen fuel cell. There will be a mix of technologies depending on the ways the vehicles are used, depending on the duty cycle. And here in the quote, the EPA projects that from model year 2030 to 2032, manufacturers may choose to produce battery electric vehicles for about 30 to 56% of light-duty vehicles, light-duty vehicle sales, and about 20 to 32% of medium-duty vehicle sales. That's the super-duty pickups that we work in. So the EPA is forecasting that out in 2030 to 2032, battery production may reach around 1/3 of the super-duty market. And again, the duty cycle, the ones that it will replace are the gasoline, not the diesel, because the diesel needs the pulling. Yeah, diesel needs larger batteries. So it's logical that it will be the petrol engines that convert. And I think that we still have a really strong long run on the super-duty production. While we are doing the different sectors, we do heavy duty, we do passenger vehicle. Let's look at off-road also. And there was a really interesting presentation at the International Engine Congress in Germany in February of this year from the Vice President of Development at Deutz. And I just took 3 of his overheads, and I wanted to share them today. So the first one, he says, yeah, it works for cars. You know, you need 75 kilowatt-hour battery. The battery weighs about 500 kilos. It works. But for a tractor that plows or harvests all day long in the field, you need 10 tons of batteries. The tractor itself weighs 10 tons. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Deutz, I think, was very bold in this overhead because they projected their powertrain mix out to 2050. And you see that today it is all diesel, and that will decline. You see that in 2050 it's got some diesel, these renewable diesel fuels, hydrogen internal combustion engines, and then the new technologies. But what's really interesting in this plot is that if you take a horizontal line, Deutz forecasts that it will make the same number of engines in 2050 as it does today. Now, whether that's entirely from market growth or because they think they're going to get an increase in the market share, it's a very confident statement. And even if we were to say that half of the off-road vehicles are going to be electrified in 2050, again, the duty cycle. A lot of off-road vehicles are like forklifts working in a warehouse or digging machines. They don't travel far and they don't travel fast. They don't need big engines. The engine is just there to drive the hydraulics to operate the bucket. So when we look at duty cycle, and again, thank you to Deutz for being so clear on this, when you have low load, like in a warehouse, and you don't have long distance, sure, you can use electricity. But at the other end of the spectrum, the higher the load and the more demanding the duty cycle, it will still be internal combustion, just with clean fuels. So again, this movement from engines to energy. So let's put that phase of the presentation behind us. Let's take some time now to look out at what will happen in the remaining 7.5 months of this year. We see 4 main levers for driving the result in full year 2024. The first is the overall market development. Here in Europe, the commercial vehicle market is softening. Analysts generally think that in the second half of the year, the commercial vehicle market will be down around 10%. In the US, it's different. In the US, they think that lower interest rates will drive commercial vehicle sales. The forecast is that the US will be up 2% this year, 4% next year. The US is a little bit bigger than Europe for us, so maybe we end up at something like 5 to 10% down in the second half of the year. The Traton ramp, you know that we started that production in the beginning of 2022. We said that at full volume it would give 1 million incremental engine equivalents per year. We're not quite halfway through that ramp. We're delivering to Scania, we're delivering to Navistar in the US, but just starting MAN. And MAN will ramp through this year and really the heavy ramp next year. So I think we've got really good growth from that program over the next year and a half. And if you haven't seen, really positive, Scania's new engine, which is 8% more fuel efficient than the previous generation engine, won the Green Truck of the Year award here in Europe. When Europe says that we have to reduce from 2019 to 2030 by 45%, some of that is already done. Yeah, and it's done with SinterCast and with CGI. They have won 9 of the last 14 years. 8 of those were with SinterCast CGI. We have also talked about a mid-year stoppage. We first announced that in August of last year. At that time, we said it would happen in the second half of this year. I made an interview about a month ago, and I said it looks now like it will be more summer than autumn. It keeps changing. The OEM has slightly changing plans. We now think that we get through most of the third quarter without an impact from that stoppage. And again, that gives us confidence that we can extend to a 14th consecutive quarter with increasing engine equivalents. The last one on our list is FAW in China. We've been talking about FAW for a long time. We got that order back in 2020. They have 3 engines in an engine family, 11-liter, 13-liter, and 16-liter. They tried to launch the 16-liter engine in 2022. The market was terrible in China. It wasn't time to launch a new engine. It was the first 16-liter in China. It was an expensive engine. So it didn't take. They're regrouping. They'll come back with the 16-liter. The 13-liter is the sweet spot in China. Most commercial vehicles in China are 13-liter, and that will be where we start. We'll see some ramping of pre-production this year, and it will really jump for us next year. There's a lot of moving parts in the FAW program, and I want to show some statistics here. So you see the Chinese truck market, it's traditionally been over 1 million units per year, and they had this terrible reduction in 2022. It reduced by half. Yeah. Last year it grew by 29%. So far, the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year is up 13%. So it continues to grow. In the first quarter, they sold 241,000 commercial vehicles. So that's on pace to come to around 1 million for full year. So it's recovering. And you see the number of vehicles produced and sold by FAW. When the market went in half in 2022, FAW went down by 2/3. So it was a very difficult period for them. What we have to watch for going forward is how the market recovers and what the market share will be for FAW. All of those truck companies are state-owned, and they are redistributing the volume. And so I'm not sure that FAW will continue to be the largest. We said that historically, FAW alone has been as big as the entire American market or the entire European market. And you can see that data, 2019 through 2021. It wasn't, of course, the case in 2022, but I think they'll get back there. It will be really interesting to see the 2024 volume. So 3 things at play in FAW, the volume of the entire market, the market share for FAW, and the third one is natural gas. So last year, with the benefit of low-cost natural gas from Russia, natural gas truck sales in China surged. It went to 50%. Yeah? Because natural gas is lower power and lower efficiency, it can use weaker materials. So the natural gas engine is produced in gray iron. And the other thing that we have to watch for is how the natural gas market will evolve in China and how much of the mix will that take. Is natural gas a threat to SinterCast? No, it's not. Here is a study that was done by the International Council on Clean Transportation. You know these guys as the ones who uncovered the Volkswagen diesel scandal. This study was commissioned by California. California said, what's our best way forward between now and when we have electric? Because that is the path of California. And so they did this study on natural gas, and they said that the CO2 reduction is modest, only 10 to 20%. It will cost billions in short-term infrastructure. There are 5 to 50 times more ultrafine particulates, the carcinogenous, the ones that cause cancer. And methane, which is 80% of natural gas, is 82 times more harmful than CO2 in a 20-year perspective. And it lasts for a long time in the atmosphere. It is 30 times more harmful than CO2 in a 100-year perspective. So if we look to the highlight of the report, they say that diesel is a better alternative. And in the last point, once fugitive methane emissions are factored in, methane losses during refueling and during operation, natural gas heavy vehicles are on average more harmful to the climate than heavy-duty diesel vehicles. Yeah. Natural gas is not a threat to us. China didn't do that last year for the environment. China did that for the economy. We know that it will be a mix. We have electric as a potential way forward. We have hydrogen fuel cells. We have hydrogen internal combustion, and we have net zero. And I've always said that the 2020s will be the decade of development and decision. We don't know how it will shake out yet. And people are certainly starting to recognize that electric is not going to be fast or easy. Hydrogen is starting to become primary path. I think also renewable diesel. But for SinterCast, hydrogen means growth and high volume in perpetuity. And I'll show a plot. This is the hydrogen engine that TUPE did together with AVL, the Austrian engine design consultancy firm, and Westport, the Canadian fuel injection firm. And they showed different levels of efficiencies for different types of engines. So you can see in the bottom left, when you have a hydrogen internal combustion engine, if you use a spark plug to ignite the hydrogen, you have relatively low power, relatively low torque, this pulling power, and you have a thermal efficiency, BTE, brake thermal efficiency, of just 42%. It's not an efficient engine. Diesel today is around 48%, but if you can inject the hydrogen and squeeze it until it explodes, like you do in a diesel engine today, then you have high power, you have high torque, and you have high thermal efficiency. And this is the route that the industry is pursuing, and this is SinterCast in perpetuity. And we are supporting 3 hydrogen engine programs currently and other discussions underway. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for us. I speak about it being a mix, and I found a really good quote recently, just a few weeks ago, and I want to share that with you. So the chief technology officer from Volvo was in the United States, and he met business journalists, and this is his quote. He says, "Far too many politicians across the globe want to ban technologies instead of telling us what they want to achieve," he said. "I think that we will need many different solutions. There is no silver bullet in order to decarbonize all road transport across the globe. We will need to have a little bit broader palette, a mix of technologies." He says, "I have 15,000 engineers, and they will develop the best technology to meet what you want to achieve, but don't ban technology." Stenquist stated that this year, in 2024, Volvo trucks will spend more money on internal combustion engine development than ever before. He's not doing that for 3 years. He's doing that for 25 years. And something that we shared in the annual report this year, it's from the US Department of Energy and the EPA in the US, also the Department of Housing was involved and a couple of others. They showed what they called a blueprint for the US getting transportation to net zero in 2050. And again, you see that it will be a mix. There is battery electric, hydrogen for fuel cell, for combustion engine, and also sustainable or renewable liquid fuels. And this is the SinterCast opportunity. This is the SinterCast opportunity in 2050. The market is fine. The market is just fine. Don't be alarmed by the headlines. So before we finish, I know that a lot of people are interested in our petrol engine program, so let's look at that just briefly. So we took a 3-cylinder, 1.2-liter gasoline engine from PSA, Peugeot, and we redesigned it in CGI, together with Tupi and Ricardo in the UK, and it's got a lot of really positive publicity. I will be making a webinar for the American Foundry Society on it again next month. Our CGI engine had the same weight. It was stronger. It had lower CO2. In our case, 54% less CO2 during manufacturing. Lower cost. And because it is stronger and stiffer, it doesn't vibrate as much. It means we have less noise, vibration, and harshness. And also because the thermal conductivity of CGI is lower than aluminum, we have thermal benefits, especially when combusting renewable fuels or ethanol. Yeah? So it's a really powerful story. You have same weight, less CO2, less cost. It's a really powerful cell. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Andre Ferraresi from Tupi. He's the research director there. He's done a wonderful job of promoting it to the OEMs. He was co-author on our paper. And Tupi has done a really good job of promoting it. So, in conclusion, I come back to the top 5 targets that we published last year. 10% compounded annual growth through 2030 on the back of commercial vehicles. Yeah, I believe we'll do that. Greater than 70% gross margin in 2028. Nothing fundamentally in the company will change. We'll grow the business. We won't really grow the headcount or the cost side. We were 73% in each of the last 2 years. We will keep it above 70%. We drive operating margin from both sides, from the revenue side, from the cost side. We will reach and exceed 40% in 2028. When we again think of specific performance, 1.5 million crowns of profit per employee. We are one of the most profitable companies on NASDAQ Stockholm, and we will grow that leadership. We're currently 61 million tons of CO2 saving. We'll get to 100. I think we can have a chance to get there before 2028. Today we have 14 years with your decision of consecutive growth in the ordinary dividend. You see the confidence in the growth, keeping the slope in that engine equivalent line, keeping the slope in the revenue line. That will drive us to 2030. That gets us to 20 years, and then game on for the next 5 years. And if I may, just before concluding, I will change from the top 5 targets to the top 6, the 6th being the CEO succession, which is something that's very near and dear to Bob's heart and to the entire board. We announced the succession plan last September. Vitor joined us in January. It's been an extremely good start, an excellent start. He's dug into the technology nowadays more than I do. He has participated in the forecasting for the market, both for the current programs and for the programs that we have in the pipeline. So he becomes familiar with all of those. He's been involved in the communications, in the board activity. He's taking the lead in the ESG program. He's also taking the lead for us in the hydrogen activities. Beyond that, he's made a really good start with our biggest customer. Tupi is more than 75% of our volume. It's more than 75% of our revenue. And he's been involved in all of the discussions with Tupi. We have what we call A-level meetings between Tupi's executive management and our executive management. And the last meeting was done entirely with Vitor and Marjorie, directly in Portuguese. Very efficient. And they have embraced him. Vitor will be there for 1 month resident period in Brazil, probably around October. He will also have 1 month residence in Mexico in the first half of next year. And then I hope we repeat that back to Brazil, back to Mexico to really embed with the process and embed with the people and to develop the relationships which have been so helpful for me over these years. The business is in good shape. The succession plan is in good shape. And I look forward to continue supporting both of them. Thank you.